In this podcast, we're going to take a look at comparing and contrasting Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory and Lazarus's cognitive mediation model. First thing I want to point out is that these two theories of emotion emphasize the role of cognition. That does not mean that the other theories, Cannon-Bard and James Lange, do not have a place for cognition. They do. It's just that these two emphasize and prioritize the role of cognition more so than those other theories. The second factor, which is rather annoying, is an issue of consistency. Some textbooks actually consider Lazarus's theory the same as Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory of emotion. Other textbooks separate them out and differentiate them. I'm going to show you how the textbooks differentiate them. So I do not think AP is going to nitpick too much, since there is not even consistency in the psychological community about this, but we're going to emphasize the textbooks that emphasize the difference. And one of our AP textbooks, one of the AP textbooks does focus on how they are different from each other. Okay, so let's take a look at Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory in this green box here. We have our stimulus. And the stimulus, depending upon the stimulus, can result in arousal, our physiological arousal, and then a cognitive appraisal. The appraisal always results in a cognitive label, but that's the cognitive role there. And what this emphasizes is, what Schachter and Singer emphasizes, that the cognitive appraisal is of two things. It's of the physiological arousal and the stimulus in context, the environmental cues. Okay? So those are the two things that are being appraised. Okay? Now, in Lazarus's theory of emotion, the cognitive mediation model, we have our stimulus, a snarling dog. And directly after the perception of the stimulus, we have our cognitive appraisal. So here the emphasis is on the appraisal. The cognition part is actually appraising the stimulus. Okay? So we're not talking about appraisal of the physiological arousal at first. Now, Lazarus will probably agree that that does happen as well. But again, if we're differentiating between them, that's one way to differentiate. Now, another interesting thing is that directly after the appraisal, we have the conscious experience of the emotion. And then after that, we have the arousal. So that's another difference with between the two. And I want to just point out one more thing. I really like this slide. I did not create it. I robbed it from the internets. I think that's a good question to ask yourself whenever you're whenever you're dealing with these theories of emotion. I think the question to ask yourself is, to experience emotion, what must happen? So for instance, in James Lange, to experience emotion, I must first have a physiological response to a stimulus. Okay? In Cannon-Bard, both physiological arousal, right, and conscious awareness happen at the same time. So those things are important to think about. What must happen to experience an emotion? Okay, so that's the difference between Schachter and Singer and Lazarus.